You guys, we are on week 2 of our series called The Flip Side. And the flip side is all about this. We are taking the 3 biggest vices that the enemy uses to sideline, distract, or completely take Christians out of the game. We're taking a look at those 3 vices, and we're going to call them what they are, identify them, and then flip them on their head and run after the virtue that is the opposite. So last week we talked about lust. And lust is this need, this desire. We specifically talked about sexual lust and all the different forms that it takes place in our life. And how the opposite of that, well, we first identified that when we give into lust, it destroys. But the opposite of that, I said, was vision, which is a weird one. I get it. But what I talked about was when we really have a vision for what God wants to do in us and through us, that helps us push off those immediate desires, to push those off and wait for what the Lord brings, because we recognize that that is greater. Now, tonight, I'm real grateful for those of you who came, especially if you knew what we're talking about, because we're talking about greed. And greed is one of those issues that I think a lot of us feel like, man, I'm kind of excited to have enough money to worry about greed. Like, this is one of those topics where you're like, yeah, I understand that's a vice. I don't understand what it's like. But I want to push back against that a little bit. That is actually one of the reasons why it's so deceptive, so tricky, because greed, what I'm going to argue tonight, has little to do with how much you have in your bank account. But whatever you have, however much, even if it's negative, and even all the other stuff you have, greed has to do with your attitude with which you approach those things. In Luke 16:10, it says this: "He who is faithful in a very little thing is faithful also in much. And he who is unrighteous in very little is unrighteous also in much." What we want to talk about tonight is greed, and I want to hopefully paint a picture how it is something that we deal with. This was really convicting writing this message, because over and over again I saw different ways that I deal with greed and have to repent and work through. But even more than that, guys, if we can understand this and develop the opposite, run after the opposite virtue in our life now, before we have tons of money, then it's going to help establish that attitude when we're in a different financial position. Are you guys with me? Right? If you could be faithful when you have a little, God says, man, you're going to be faithful with a lot. If you can be faithful when you don't have a lot, then you're going to be faithful when you do in other ways. So I want to talk about greed, because we are somewhere on the spectrum between not having anything and having a lot. We're somewhere there, and hopefully we're moving towards being a little bit more financially secure. Yes, Jesus talked about money a ton. There's this pushback in our culture, man. I don't want to go to church because they always talk about money. They always want your money. First off, most churches don't talk about money that much. Second off, if we did talk about money as much as Jesus talked about money, what that would look like is once a month we had our money message. Over a quarter of the parables in the Bible, Jesus is talking about finances. He talks about finances more than faith, more than prayer combined. He talks about money a lot. And it's a big deal because it is one of these vices that that our enemy uses to distract us, to sideline us. Now, I want to read a passage in Luke 12. Before you put it up, there's this, the greatest sermon that the Lord ever gave is a Sermon on the Mount, Matthew 5 through 7. Luke 12 also quotes a big chunk of that what we're going to read tonight. But in Matthew 6 or Luke 12, it's actually one of the passages I refer people to maybe more than any other passage in Scripture, and you'll see why in a little bit. But before he gets to that part in Luke 12, he precedes it with a parable that I want to read right now. It's in Luke 12, verse 16, and it says this: "He told them a parable, saying, the land of a rich man was very productive. And he began reasoning to himself, saying, what shall I do, since I have no place to store my crops? Then he said, this is what I will do. I will tear down my barns and build larger ones. And there I will store all my grain and all my goods. And I will say to my soul, soul, you have many goods laid up for you for many years to come. Take your ease, eat, drink, and be merry. But God said to him, you fool, this very night your soul is required of you, and now you will own what you have prepared. So is a man who stores up treasure for himself and is not rich towards God. Man. So I want to break this down for a couple minutes. Now, I don't think any of us have these extra barns of cash, excess cash that we're just setting to the side, and we're like, man, we're running out of room. We need more barns to just, put all our Bitcoin and everything in there. I don't think that's the situation we're in. But again, we have stuff. Now, I'm not going to go into all the statistics, but I just want to let you know this. According to a 2018 study, there are over 50,000 storage unit facilities in the United States. There are over 23 million storage units, actual physical units, in our country alone. And that is over 10 times as much in all of Europe. In fact, that is more, let me get the exact stat, that is more than there are Walmarts, Starbucks, and 7-Elevens combined, times 2. We have a lot of stuff. So much stuff that we have to find a place to store our stuff. And you and I, we're in the same boat. I was just talking to someone who moved, and they had, like they're young. They haven't owned a house. They haven't started collecting a bunch of stuff, but in their room, it took them a long time just to figure out what they're going to bring to their new home. We have a lot of stuff. But here, Jesus doesn't necessarily call out the guy's stuff. He doesn't call out that the guy had a successful field and a bunch of produce. In fact, I think the Lord wants us to have really successful careers and really successful businesses. I would be a proponent, if you take care of money, I want you to have a lot of it. What he calls out here is how he responded to all of that. And I don't think it's that far from how we respond to what we have, even if it's not that much. Our struggle with lust is, man, I'm dealing with this problem, but I don't want to talk about it. I don't want to bring it up. I'm struggling, but let's keep it a secret, or let's try to find a way to make it acceptable. And eventually you get to a point where you're like, well, I'm just broken. It just is what it is. So I'm going to continue dealing with lust because there's no way out. And we last week broke down the lies behind that. But with greed, it looks a little bit different. And greed, a lot of us, if you're like me, you don't feel, look, before I wrote this message, I didn't think I was like the example of generosity at Foothills. I know I'm not. But I also didn't feel like, man, greed, like I could see it popping up here and there. Again, it was convicting writing this, and I think greed is subtle. Because the ways that we struggle with it, we write off and we describe it in other ways where we can get away with it. Here's the first one. The first thing is our first thoughts are on us, are of us. So much so that we never even consider greed as being an option. Sorry, guys. I usually don't chew gum, and that's why. Let me give you an example. How many of you guys received a stimulus check over the last 3 years, 4 years? Now, don't raise your hands for this, but when I got my stimulus check, what was your first thought? My first thought was, nice. I can buy something that I've been putting off. Like my first thought, in fact, and this is going to make me sound like a real dirtbag. I kind of am. That's why I need Jesus. But Father's Day is coming up. And the first thought that I typically have for Father's Day, which I clearly need Jesus, is not anything about my kids. It's not anything about my father. It's, man, I got an excuse to buy something for myself, right? Like now it's time, I'm a dad, and I have an excuse to blow some money on something that I haven't been able to justify for a while. Look, I don't consider myself greedy, but I also don't often consider something long enough to realize that greed's at work. I don't think that's too different for many people in this room. We get a stimulus check, and our first thoughts are just quickly on us. This guy here, he had too much in the parable. And his first thought was, man, what am I going to do, right? What shall I do so that I could take care of my stuff? His first thoughts were on him. But that's not it. That's not how we struggle. It goes on beyond that. Because the next thing we think is, man, I earned it. I earned whatever's in my bank account. I earned this check. I earned this bonus. I earned whatever it is. Even that stimulus, man, I paid the government. I pay my taxes. I earned it. It's mine. I get to keep it. In fact, not only did I earn it, but I deserve it. I think about this way too much. I struggle with this, where I get something and it's like, man, but I put in my time. I put in my effort. Like that, whatever that resource is, I've worked hard for it. And these are things that are acceptable for us to talk about. Like there's times when we're talking with our friends and there's needs or there's stuff going on, but you throw out one of these, and often it's like, yeah, you know what? You're right. You did work hard. You do whatever you want with that. That's yours. You just self-care, self-love, whatever, like take care of yourself type thing. We go on. We struggle with this because we see our current set of circumstances often, we see these extra blessings as needs. Let me explain what I mean by that. When I was, and some of you have heard me say this, so forgive me for going old man and repeating myself. But when I was in college, like 19, 20, financially, I was in the position where I checked my bank account every single day because overdrafting was always a concern. Like, and now you might be thinking, man, you're bad with your money. There was an aspect of that, but also I didn't make much money. So it was a combination of I'm bad with very little money. And so my goal, my dream, this would be me making it, is for me to be able to get to a place where I could spend $15 on a CD just whenever I wanted. Now, you guys know what CDs are. I'm not going to go that old man and describe it. But now we have Spotify. And Spotify costs about what a CD costs. And it has all of these excess. I mean, you can listen to whatever. But there are a lot of young adults. Maybe this isn't you. But there's a lot of young adults that see stuff like Spotify not as this extra blessing, not as this extra option, but man, it's just like how I need this to get by. I need this to continue. This is part of my needs. How I get, and it's not just Spotify. I was thinking everyone always bags on coffee drinks, spending a lot of money on coffee. I think there's something to be said there, but it goes on with energy drinks or going to restaurants or getting certain things, like wearing certain things or having AirPods or things like that. Look, if you have AirPods, I don't know necessarily that you're doing anything wrong. I also think those are cool. Like, that's sweet. And we can easily turn something like that into something that we just see as, man, this is a necessity instead of a blessing. And again, this type of conversation flows so much into our lives. Last couple, I'm going to go quick. We can compare and justify. You compare, man, so-and-so has this. So, man, and we could do this with Christians. If they have it and they're following God, that means I can have it when we don't know the circumstances. We don't know how they're spending their money. We don't know how they got that, anything like that. And lastly, we blame God. We could blame God on our greed because, man, the reason I'm hoarding all this money and all these resources is so that I can ultimately give it away. Right? I'm just being really cautious and careful because I want to get to a place where I can give it all away. I was listening to this author on a podcast. His name's J.P. Pokluda. I like him a lot. And he said, all these people always want to get to a place where they're rich so they could give it all away. But what that means is they want to live poor. Well, they could do that now. And so if they don't want to do that now, then I question that they'll eventually want to do that if that's really their motives. That's something to sit on. That was good. But you see here, all of these things I could say in front of you in a way here on Tuesday night from this stage in a way that sounds really wise and good. And yet at the core of it, too often, maybe not always, but too often what it is, man, I like my stuff, and I want to hold on to it, and I want to get more of it. And here's how you figure out the difference. Here's the motives, the root behind that. So often, the root of greed is this fear that we don't have enough. What's interesting, I was just thinking as I was worshiping, that's not that much different than even lust. Lust is, man, I need it, I want it, I don't have it. This fear of like, man, if I don't take advantage of this right now, I won't be satisfied, I won't whatever. But greed, there's a bunch of that in there. Man, I can't give away these resources because I have so many needs. And if I give it away, man, I won't have enough. And for a lot of people, this goes so far beyond finances. And it goes into expectations you have for life. I want to guard against setting standards like this because it's a standard. Where you are, how you are currently perceiving your financial situation is a standard that you are setting for your future. And I don't want to say the rest of your life because the Lord could come in and change this, but hear me out. If right now you don't have enough and there's some insecurity, there's some anxiety, the worry that, man, if I don't hold on to this paycheck or this amount, or if I don't, whatever it is, I'm not going to have enough, that is likely to stay with you even past the next pay raise. You guys have heard it before that as you increase your income, you increase your way of life. And that's just been proven over and over and over again. That's because at the core of usually our insecurity, our fear, our greed, the core of that stuff doesn't get dealt with. So the next pay raise doesn't change it. It just increases its ability and influence in our life. I've dealt with this. My buddy, I was talking to a friend, he was talking about a financial investment that one of our mutual friends was making, and he said, man, this guy, he's just not willing to take this risk because he has this poverty mindset. And I thought about that, and I'm like, well, I wouldn't take that risk, and partially because, man, I struggle with that too. I struggle with this idea. I was thinking, I didn't particularly love the risk anyways, but I struggle, but money was a thing growing up that I never felt like we had enough of. So it's easy for me now, no matter what's going on in my life, to feel like it's not enough. And the result of that is what I do have, I can't appreciate fully. And I feel like I always have to hold on to it and gain more. That's something I have to come against. And it's this fear, it's this insecurity, it's this lack of trust in God. We have the root of it is the fear that we're not enough. Man, if I don't have this much in my bank account, if I don't wear this type of clothing, if I don't go to this place, whether it's a fancy restaurant or an amusement park, if I don't have this brand item, whatever, fill your subculture that you're in, just whatever thing you're into, you can think of the next level thing that you feel like you need. Then I'm going to be seen. If I don't have those things, then I'm going to be seen as less than. If I don't, eventually it just gets bigger. If I don't have this home, if I don't have this stock portfolio, if I don't have this, I'm not enough. So sometimes we feel like we don't have enough, we're not enough, we won't experience enough. That's why we go out of our way to go to concerts or stuff like that, often, not always, or I won't be enough. And here's the future thing. If we feel this in our life, if we're dealing with this fear and this insecurity, then it's hard to know when when do you reach the goal? And so you just continually feel like you fall short. Jesus responds to that. He says in verse 19 of Matthew 6, we're going to skip. You can go on in Luke and read this. I like the Matthew passage. It's what I'm more familiar with, but it's similar. It says here, Luke 19, do not store up for yourselves treasures on earth where moth and rust destroy, where thieves break in and steal. But store up for yourself treasures in heaven where neither moth nor rust destroys, where thieves do not break in or steal. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. He's just speaking right to that idea of, man, you have to hold on to it. You have to keep it. You have to guard it. You have to protect it. You have to make sure that it's there for you because it really is an extension of you and your worth. And none of that's true. And here he goes on and he says, for the eye is a lamp of your body. So then if your eye is clear, your whole body will be full of light. But if your eye is bad, your whole body will be full of darkness. If then the light that is in you is darkness, how great is the darkness? For no one can serve two masters, for either he will hate the one and love the other, and he will be devoted to one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and wealth. Your translation might say like mammon or mammon, that means wealth. What we see here is what this ultimately leads to is it blinds us. And we play this game where we're serving two masters. I want to tell one more story, and then we're going to go to the flip side. I've honestly been pretty decent with money for most of my life. When I was broke and a young adult and I wanted CDs, I really wasn't making much. And there's a lot behind that. But I have a bunch of financial goals, and one of them, and it's kind of silly to even say out loud, but I'd like to have a second property by the time I'm 35. I'm almost 35, and it's not looking good. And what I've figured out over the last 3-4 years as I've gone through this battle of wanting this and having this goal is what I've discovered is I've had a couple opportunities that I could have taken, which is in itself crazy to think about, that there's some opportunities I could have pursued to reach that goal. But I've stopped short because what I've recognized is a lot of these opportunities would come at a cost. They would put me in a position financially that is either really risky or really stressful. Maybe it would require my wife to start working to a greater degree than she is right now. And we've hesitated all these times because we didn't feel right about it, and what we recognized is it would really challenge our ability to serve God in the way He has called us to serve Him. Now, in no way am I complaining. No, none of that. I want to really just share with you what I've battled with in this. Is what I've realized is if I was to take some of these steps, not only would I be distracted and caught up in the stress of maintaining these things, and to be frank, I've seen some friends really struggle with that. But it's likely going to put me in a place where my wife has to either work harder or I have to pick up more side jobs or things like that in a way that is just going to make my job here more difficult. Or it's going to make the mission that God has called my family to step into, the purpose behind our mission, our marriage and our family, not able for us to step into that. I've seen that I can't serve God in the way that He has called me and the call on my life. And it's going to be different for you, but hopefully I can't do that and serve wealth in the way that I've wanted to serve it, or the goals that I've wanted to reach. And even writing this message, what I figured out is I've asked myself, where have those goals come from? Where have I defined that? Why do I see that as something that I need to reach at this time? Where does that come from? I have to figure out. But I've also recognized, truth be told, I have the standard of life that I wished for when I was 19 or 20. And too often I miss it because I get caught up, even subtly, looking at all these other things. That's why the vice of greed is so deceptive. Is I don't think I'm a greedy person. I think there's many things I do that are generous, and yet I could see how this has crept into a lot of stuff in my life, and I don't want it there. God responds, and this is the passage that I refer people to often, over and over and over again, and it's in Matthew 6, verse 25, and we're going to read all the way to 34. And it says this, "For this reason I say to you, do not be worried about your life, as to what you'll eat or what you'll drink, nor for your body as to what you'll put on. Is not life more than food, and the body more than clothing?" Jesus could have gone on and said, is it not just money? It's just money. He goes, look at the birds of the air. They do not sow, nor reap, nor gather into barns, and yet your heavenly Father feeds them. Are you not worth more than they? And who of you, by being worried, can add a single hour to this life? Why are you worried about clothing? Observe how the lilies of the field grow. They do not toil, nor do they spin, yet I say to you that not even Solomon in all his glory clothed himself like one of these. But if God so clothes the grass of the field, which is alive today and is thrown into the furnace tomorrow, will he not much more clothe you, you of little faith? Do not worry then, saying, what will we eat, or what will we drink, or what will we wear for clothing? Or fill in the blank. Like when it comes to finances, I want you to ask yourself, what is your worry? Like what in your mind, what is it like, how will I make this bill? Or how will I make this purchase? Or how will I attain that? What is it? For the Gentiles eagerly seek, verse 32, all these things, for your heavenly Father knows that you need them all. But seek first his kingdom and his righteousness, and all these things will be added to you. Do not worry about tomorrow, for tomorrow will take care of itself. Each day has enough trouble of its own. Here, Jesus says, and I love this isn't a parable, this is his sermon. Jesus says, hey, you, stop worrying. I'm going to take care of you. Focus on the kingdom and those responsibilities, and I will provide. Now, I want to argue that the opposite of greed is stewardship. Stewardship. Evan guessed it. And here's why. Stewardship is this. It's the careful and responsible management of something entrusted into your care. That's Merriam-Webster. And it has to do with way more than money. Like you are a steward of your money, of your talents, of your time, of it all. R.C. Sproul puts it this way. I don't have this quote up there. Just listen to this. He says, stewardship is exercising our God-given dominion over his creation. I like that. It's reflecting the image of our Creator in his care, responsibility, maintenance, protection, and beautification of his creation. Stewardship is this. Everything you have, God has given you. Not to own, but to take care of and use for his name and for his kingdom, for his glory. And this, I think, is so freeing. And at the end of the parable of the talents, you guys know the parable of talents, 1, 3, 5, one buries it, bad dude, 3, 5, they go and they take care of it, and God's pleased. And at the end of that, verse 23, it says, his master said to him, well done, good and faithful slave. You are faithful with a few things. I will put you in charge of many things. Enter into the joy of your master. And what we see here is that ultimately, not only are we called to steward and take care of the things God has given us and multiply it, but when we do that properly, he's going to give us more to take care of and be responsible for. We don't get like this break retirement to just waste away the last third of our lives just on ourselves. No, God says, I want you to always be stewarding what I want to give you. And that ultimately is where we're not only going to enter into the joy of our masters. That's what we're seeking. That's what we're running after. The joy of our master. We're looking for joy, but then we're going to be given even more and more. Now, here's the truth about our finances. Here's the truth about all of these needs. Is first off, everything is bigger than you. It's not about us. We have them all up there. God provides. What we have is his anyways, and God provides for a purpose. Here's what's freeing about this. Greed says, I need more. I need more. If what I have, in order to be enough, to have enough, all of that, I just need it. And God, it's not, you never really have it. You never can. You can have I know people just 2 years ago who had Bitcoins, plural. It's looking different right now, right? I know people who have lost multiple homes. I know people, you just name it. And you never ultimately have it. But if it's not yours in the first place, there's something so freeing about that. But God provides. What you really need is always there. And I want to challenge you, if you feel like it's not, it's either because you don't really need it, or I believe there's a degree of things that you've squandered. Right? The prodigal son went and squandered everything, and then he lost it all. He did have some needs that weren't being met. He was starving, but he was in that position because he put himself there, and the Lord revealed that and brought him back to another position to give him everything he needs. You have everything you need, and if you feel like you don't, either go to wise counsel and ask, hey, do I not have this because I am a bad steward? Or do I not have this because right now in the season, I don't need it, and I need to learn what that looks like. But what we have is God's anyways. And this doesn't mean you can't ever have nice things or that you always have to suffer. But that's not really our issue. Very few of us are struggling because we choose to suffer too much. And lastly, this. God provides for a purpose. Stewardship is God saying this, look, you might sometimes feel like you're not enough, or you don't have enough, or you won't have enough. Pause all that. I got all that. I'm going to take care of you with all of it. But what I'm giving you isn't so that you can sit fat and happy. That guy in the beginning of the parable, he said, hey, I'm going to tell my soul, relax, be merry, drink up. Like, that's not the purpose of everything. God says, I am going to provide, I will take care of it, and I'm going to take care of it so that you can use it for my glory and use it for my purposes. You are enough that I'm trusting you with this. Now go and use it. He gives you everything for a purpose. When we are in this position, here's what's freeing. Look, I think it's likely at some point in my life I'm going to be able to get another property. But it won't matter. It doesn't matter if I never do. And I'm not just saying that, like, so I feel better about myself. It does feel good saying it out loud. I do feel, it really doesn't matter. If the stock market crashes and everything everyone has in saving is gone tomorrow, God is still good. Whatever you put your trust in, whatever is the thing that you're like, I need this in order to be safe, secure. If it's not Jesus, it really doesn't matter. What's freeing about that is it doesn't matter because God takes care of his children. We have this need in our life, man. You have to get retirement. I have friends who are like, man, if I make retirement and I don't have $2 million in the bank, they are worried. They are insecure. They are like, there is a real fear that they are dealing with. And I want to tell you this. If you make it into retirement and you have nothing, that might challenge you in some ways. I think there's arguments to be said to save up, especially if you're in a career that you can't do always. But it's not so you can sit and be fat and happy. And if you don't get there, it's not like, well, Jesus says, that's it. You're going to die homeless or whatever. We can trust that God will provide. So the worry, the insecurity, the anxiety, all of that, right now, lean into the Lord and trust. Now, how do we develop that mindset? How do we get there? Because that's not easy, and as you can tell, I'm working through it. I'm a work in progress. You start building that mindset first and foremost by giving everything you have to God. Man, you guys, I did that. That's all my fault. But I wanted to, you like it all up at once? Okay. Don't read too much ahead. Here's what I want to challenge you to do. Really, if you feel like, man, I struggle a little bit with this, go home, take a piece of paper, and write everything you have that's yours. Every possession you can think of, every friendship, every talent, every gift, everything. It's going to take a minute. Write it all down. And then give it to God. And just say, look, it's not like it's not his already. You're declaring in your heart that bank account, that possession, that car, that whatever it is, you're declaring it is his. That's how we start. I want to challenge you. The next thing you do is you tithe. And I think there's an argument to be made that the 10% Old Testament tithe isn't exactly it. I think the best argument is it's probably more, if anything. There's way easier arguments that's the case than it's less. We here at Foothills believe 10% is what we've been called to give. I want to challenge you to tithe. Trust God with that 10%. If you ever feel like, yeah, but I don't trust the institution that I'm giving to, Foothills, come talk to me about that. And I'll explain a little bit more how we use that money and why we do what we do. But I want to encourage you, tithe, trust God. I believe he calls us to do a minimum of that. Next thing, write out the standard of life you want to live. And I bring this up because not only is it good to give that to God in the future, but then it helps you understand when you've met that. Again, I don't want to be blinded by the fact I can go buy a CD right now, and I'm not going to be stressed about overdrafting, right? I don't buy CDs anymore, but the principle stands, right? I don't want you to get to a place that you right now wish you could be at, and you just to arrive there and wish you could be somewhere else. 4, pray to find satisfaction in the Lord. You guys know that over-quoted, out of context, Philippians 4:13. It starts with this, verse 10, but I rejoice in the Lord greatly. And he's writing this in prison in a time of great difficulty. And he says that now at least you have revived your concern for me. Indeed, you were concerned before, but you lacked opportunity. But now I'm speaking not from want, for I've learned to be content in whatever circumstance. For I know how to get along in humble means. I also know how to live in prosperity. In any and every circumstance, I have learned the secret to being filled and going hungry, both of having abundance and suffering need. And in all of that, I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. Sometimes we're like, hey, find joy in the Lord. Find joy. And what we mean by that is like push through. Like, you know, when you eat a meal that you really don't want to eat, and you're just like, I'm going to do it. Oh, and you put on that fake smile. A lot of Christians feel like serving God is taking a bite of something you don't want to eat and putting on a fake smile. That is not Christianity, and that's not even in regards to this. We can find real joy in the Lord. Psalm 107:9 says, for he satisfies the longing soul, and the hungry soul he fills with good things. Pray that you would be satisfied with what you have. And the band can come up. The last thing is this. I want to encourage you to use your resources today to build who you want to be tomorrow, to build tomorrow's character. What I mean by this is that if you plan right now, you say, I'm going to start being generous when I make $50,000 a year. I'm going to start being generous when I make $70,000, $100,000 a year, whatever it is. You probably won't. I doubt you will. Be generous now with what you have. And not just financially, time, energy, all of that. If you practice it now, then you'll be able to maintain it. That's how it works. Let's develop that mindset now so we can stay with it going forward. All right. Will you guys, will you stand up? Let's go ahead and hit the lights. Here's what I'd like to do. I'm going to pray in a moment. In fact, will you join me? Let me pray right now, even as you can keep standing up. But God, so many of us, we can look at greed on the TV. We see greed in other people. Father, I want you to reveal what greed is in my life. And I pray you would do the same for my brothers and sisters here. I don't think any of us are these crazy, greedy hoarders that would deny someone truly in need. God, but too often, I don't even consider Lord, I just don't even bring what I have to you enough and offer it to you to use, because I personally can get so caught up in these other things that blind me from generosity and from trusting you. So I want to pray, Lord, for my brothers and sisters. May you reveal areas of our life where we're anxious, we're worrying about bills today and bills tomorrow. Help us, Lord, to lay that down at